Hi there, this is Matt Chandler, and I was a speaker at the end user event over in Utrecht this year in 2012. I am a co-director of my studio, Analog Studio, with Mike Merrin and Arvid Niklasson, and I went over to EUE to talk about the Swarm commercial that our studio recently did earlier in the year. And following that, a little talk about the making of these watch idents that I was working on at the same time, actually, as the Swarm was in production. So I recorded some text at the actual event. I recorded the session live, but the audio didn't come out too good, unfortunately, so I'm just briefly re-recording it as we watch through the videos. So let's watch the commercial first, The Swarm.
The Swarm at Thorpe Park.
Alright, so that was the finished commercial. It was a really fun project for us to work on. It's always fun to do destruction and explosions and alien invasions. So this is one of the very first previous animations that Arvid knocked together in a half an hour or so, after reading through the first version of the script and storyboard. And this was the next version, assembled from the director's artwork boards. Arvid chopped them up, added a little bit of motion in After Effects, and intercut it with a more developed animatic. You can see from the layout here the commercial was laid out very early on. There was the buildings, placement of the buildings and so on were established very early. But the original move was a lot different. It's a lot longer, as you can see in this little test render as well. This was put together by Simon Reeves, who we work with regularly, one of our favourite artists to work with. This is a V-Ray sky system, like a cached lighting setup, a light cache. The environment lighting doesn't change so much over 10-15 seconds, so we just rendered the animated objects separately. And here we can see a more evolved version with a lot of little 2D layers, matte painting being dropped in the back, a lot of fires on roofs. The commercial was shot in South Africa, and Arvid went down there with Joyrider Films, the production company we were working with, to do the shoot. All the street scenes were dressed to look a little more English. So we can see now as the edits evolved, there's a lot more ride shots, live action ride shots that were shot second unit and dropped into the edit. And now we have a few little render elements, little render tests, some big rolling fume simulations, various explosions. These were generated just to populate the scene. A lot of these were only 2 or 3 simulations that were rendered from various angles and then composited in different places in a 3D composite. This is the crashing Chinook helicopter with a big fume sim coming off of it. So here you can see the original opening move doing like a corkscrew roller coaster move, which is featured in the ride, and then shooting down towards the plane. And in the original move here we swung underneath the wing of the plane, just like the ride does in reality, but that bit was cut off the end. And here are some little explosion elements for one of the buildings as we fly over. So here I've opened up one of the 3D master scenes, one of the environment master scenes, so we can see all the buildings that make up our street scene, and some low-res textures on there. You can see we had a lot of little assets to build, little cars and car parking spaces. Simon did a really great job texturing up the roads and things. He had a lot of his own assets from other projects that he's done that he threw into the scene. So early on, the layout of the street probably was the longest part of the project. Actually, while the shoot was going on, we were trying to figure out what the street was going to look like, and there's a lot more work than you think that goes into building something like a street scene, because there's just a lot of little details that you'd expect to be in there, just from the bus stop sign to the railings in the middle and the traffic lights. So all those little details are going to help make the scene look more realistic. And it wasn't particularly high poly scene, but the more and more details that you add in there, the heavier it's going to get. So here in the viewport, as we scrub through, we can see a little bit of the original beginning. There's a little garden down there that was this was projection mapped onto objects down there, and onto the things like a crashed car. Because our camera move was at this stage locked off now, it was critical to have a locked off camera move early on, so we knew what we had to build and what to detail up. You know, there's no point detailing the back of these buildings too much if we're never going to see them. So a lot of the texturing work was done kind of as a camera view, camera dependent. So things were projection painted down onto models, just lining up photographs of destruction in cars and painting them down onto models. So now we're inside 3ds Max, another scene inside 3ds Max, and there was even little Apache helicopters flying around in the background that get blown up. And there's no need for these to be particularly amazing models, they were so far away. So you can see here it's just a stock model with some bad topology, and just the rotors and the body attached to some control nulls, simple nulls that were just keyframed, flying around in the background. Some of them blow up, some of them don't. Here you can see a little fume simulation that's going to run on the bus stop or something that's blowing up. It looks like it's like a little shop with a bus stop outside, and there's like a little omni light inside which is animated to light up as a little explosion comes out, throws some debris out. A lot of the effects work was quite simple stuff. It was just particle flow systems and lots of ray fire events that were just cached and moved around to populate the scene, and little fume simulations run on top of those. And so this is the helicopter crashing into the front of the building. You don't see too much of the nice destruction that happens here in the final commercial, because there's so much smoke and fire, but Arvid set this up with using a cloth system, and we used Supermesher to cache this, because they were breaking vertices and changing vertex counts, which normally you cannot point cache, because the point order needs to stay the same, but Supermesher is a great little tool that helps out with that. So a lot of destruction in the scene and little areas that could be cached, we used Supermesher to cache those out. So here we've just got a small simple fume source being emitted from the helicopter. The fume grid is attached to the helicopter, and then we're just faking the direction of the simulation by blowing some wind through the grid. There's a small rotor fire going on there. There are a lot of layers, a lot of elements we generated for this commercial. So we, small fires on the rotors, secondary smoke simulations, little bits of office paper flying out the windows there in the background. It's a lot of fun to generate elements and scenes like this. So here's just the cache file of the building getting torn apart. Simple geometry, as you can see, but another detail that can add a lot of realism to the scene. Here is the larger simulation for the helicopter rotors. There's a particle source there firing out with a short age span and deleting quite quickly, generating a small fire but a lot of smoke. And this worked out really nicely with the camera move. The camera move swoops up through this smoke, just missing it, and it really added a lot of depth to the scene. We really felt like the helicopter was spiraling out of control and travelling quite some distance away from camera. So this single effects element really helped pull the viewer into the shot a little bit more. It was quite a long simulation. The spacing was quite small, and although the grid wasn't huge, there were a lot of sub-steps because the helicopter was moving quite quickly and the rotors were moving very quickly. So I think we just left it going overnight a couple of times. So now this is a simple, extremely simple particle flow system set up for the swarm itself, made of little flying alien spaceships. These little alien ships kind of look like little bats. They were based directly on the design of the roller coaster. They're kind of this shape with little seats for people to sit in underneath. So it's very low-res, simple instance geometry here, and a number of force operators, different wind strengths, negative wind, turbulence, some drag. It's basically controlled by a spherical negative wind, just keyframed, as you can see there, the strength is keyframed, moving across the screen, so it kind of sucks all the particles towards it. But then there's other wind systems and drag systems in there to run turbulence through, and different animations of the strength of influence and decay on these created a nice realistic swarming effect, a little bit like the Sentinels in the Matrix movies, swarming around and then shooting down and picking people up, picking kids off BMXs apparently. So here we have a little composite breakdown, kindly put together by Urban, one of our lead compositors on the project. You can see here from the base render a lot of different passes and layers going on. The buildings that were rendered out separately, depth and alien laser beams, smoke hits, helicopters in the background, little embers in the sky, which I believe were generated in After Effects and layered in before having a final grade on our in-house DaVinci Resolve. So that just about covers it for the material that I presented at this year's end user event. Obviously it's not the full length hour talk, unfortunately. There was a lot of Q&A at the end of the talk, and it was good fun to meet everybody and discuss different workflows and methodologies doing this kind of work. So thank you for watching the presentation, making of videos, and I'll play the commercial one last time.